Yeah, exactly. So I actually went to see Mandy Botankin this week. You know, Mandy was part of our our gala a couple of years ago, and our board chair, Stacey Levine, is his agent, and she got the Romemu team tickets, and we went to Englewood to hear Randy. And he was, I mean, I don't know how he felt about his show, but it was, it's always it was so beautiful. And
He's a barn burner.
he is a barn burner, and he did Somewhere Over the Rainbow in Yiddish, which of course was it was really reminded me of 2020's holidays, right? Really the original, exactly. So, okay, here we are. Can people hear us? Okay, yeah, Bob, Daniel, can you hear us down in? Okay, let's learn, we're gonna do Gepata Torah, and then we'll learn a little Torah together. Thank you, Gil. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. All right, so we have this morning we have let's get rid of that. We don't need that, and that too we don't need. Oh, there's a lot going on here. Look at that. Let's just clear it all away. Let's go to the wilderness of Zoom. This is, I'm going to call this a tired, overly extended Rabbi David English source sheet, which means very, very tired, very, very long week, lots going on, and I'm going to be dependent upon an amazing Rabbi Gilad Egner, who put together a beautiful source sheet on this. And I thought, after learning it yesterday, you know what? I said, let's bring it to the Chevra and we'll see what they say with it and see how they learn it. Because once we start learning it together, I have a feeling that it'll open up, and there'll be a lot of Torah that comes from all of you, and a lot of Torah in general around this theme. Source number one, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe, B'midbar Sinai, B'ohel Moed, V'echad l'chodesh hasheni, B'shana hashenit, L'tzeitam me'eretz Mitzrayim le'mor. Now, that's a mouthful, right? And God spoke to Moshe. Where? In the Midbar Sinai, in the Sinai wilderness. Where in the Sinai wilderness specifically? In Ohel Moed, in the tent of meeting. When? In the first of the month, that is the second month. Echad, the second month, the first day of the second month, in the second year, in the, let's say, in their exodus from the land of Egypt, saying. Now, this is the opening. Morning. This is the opening to the Parsha. It's also the opening to the fourth book of Torah, which is called Bamidbar. And the name of the book, of course, is taken from that fifth word, Midbar, which is in the desert, in the wilderness. The name given to it in English is from the Latin, or the Greek and then the Latin, which is numbers. Why numbers? Because the very first thing that the book of Numbers will talk about is numbers, which is about the census and the counting of the Israelites. But the numbers doesn't convey in any way, shape, or form the full power and pathos of the word midbar, which is wilderness or desert, but wilderness is more accurately the inscription. And I was talking to a rabbi yesterday, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, who's a friend, a colleague, and he's the head of the New York Board of Rabbis. He was the head of the New York Board of Rabbis, and he and I were speaking yesterday about the CARE Act, and all of a sudden he said to me, what are you going to say tonight? So I started telling him about my Dvar Torah for last night, and then it was just an excuse for him to tell me about what he would want to say, and he told me, and then he said to me, he told me something, and I thought it was really beautiful and touching, a very quick idea, and it'll stay with me. And then he said to me, he jokingly said, make sure you give me credit. And I said, Joe, I'm not giving you credit, but I am giving you credit. It's beautiful. He said, the truth of the matter is that the book is called Bamidbar, in the desert, but really it should be called, the two words that come together are Midbar Sinai, right? If you look there, it's not just in the wilderness, it names the wilderness, it's Midbar Sinai. He says that really that's the work in the world, is to make a wilderness into a Midbar Sinai. Like Sinai is where we receive Torah, and wilderness, like they seem to be, it's like it's one topographical, it's one location, right? But the name Sinai has all the regnant, feeling that has to do with revelation and meaning and purpose and mission, right? So it says, our work in the world is to turn Midbar into Midbar Sinai. I thought that was a very beautiful way to frame it. But of course, the question, of course, is how do you do that? And it's a bit more complicated, right? And so the second source here, I already see Jay's hand up, so I'm like nervous. Why didn't we even start yet? But Jay's got his hand up. So I'm like, what could it possibly be? And I'm thinking it must be something very important because we haven't even said anything yet. No, it's okay. So is it okay with you? We just like learn a little bit and then, okay, great. You're just putting yourself in line. I see. Okay, great. Got it. Okay. So, or you'll tell me when we call you. Okay, great. So Aviva Zornberg and it has a book. And by the way, for those people who are Aviva Zornberg fans, and I count myself amongst, a groupie, and I think anybody who's ever studied anything from Dr. Zornberg, either you don't understand it, or if you do understand it, you go out of your mind how beautiful it is, or one of those two, I think usually the options. And we were waiting for a long time for her to come out with a book on the rest of the Torah. She'd only had Genesis and Exodus for a long time, and then she eventually put out a book on the Midbar, and she called it Bewilderment, which is just so great, right? It's just to be bewildered. And so she writes, for the wilderness bewilders. For the wilderness bewilders. It undermines the very ability to speak, to know one's own experience. Its emptiness dwarfs the force of one's imagination. It is the burial site of the great enterprise of redemption that lies at the heart of this book. And so those three lines, that I can't imagine she had to craft because it came out of her own lived, it was probably just, that's the way, she's a poet, she's brilliant. And it's, wow. It's like, I want to go in there a bit because it strikes a chord, but it also, it's in tension with something, but essentially she's saying that the wilderness, and she's playing off the word midbar, which means to speak also, and midbar is with different vowel placement can become the word da there, the one who speaks. And so she's speaking of the tension that the wilderness bewilders, it undermines the very ability to speak. And when she says to speak, it's also to know one's own experience, right? And so the emptiness, she says, it's so vast, it becomes the burial site of the great enterprise, because in truth, the generation of the desert are themselves the ones who were not fully redeemed, even though they left Egypt, they didn't come into the land. And so there is a tension, of course, between the speaking power of the desert, which is highlighted in a moment by the giving of Torah in the wilderness of all places. And yet for the people in the book of Numbers, it's their own inability to metabolize and then articulate their own experience that is the fundamental core of the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers. Beth, this wonderful review that I wound up looking up, which was also remarkable. She writes, Zornberg thinks of the Israelites' 40-year journey through the wilderness as a therapeutic experience. The journey through the wilderness is a therapeutic experience, the whole 40-year period. This period of constant complaint, rebellion, and vociferous lack of faith. It's also very, a great phrase, a vociferous lack of faith, right? The nascent nation's collective cathartic experience. A core fantasy is being worked through. Even as an entire generation perishes in the wilderness, the people learns to speak of its subjective experience. And so for this particular, I think it's accurate, this review of Dr. Zornberg's work is to see the wilderness experience as one that both bewilders, but also invites a level of articulation and looking for a way to speak about their experience that the sources now will deepen in a minute. Okay, so just as our first, it very much speaks to like I was talking last night about going back to my own hometown, right? Being in a John Cougar Mellencamp song, I felt like I was in like, I was born in a small town It's not such a small town. I mean, it's great. It's called Great. They call it a Great Neck. And just the experience of going back in various iterations of my own current self has been like it was like a journey to find the right words to speak about my experience. Like it felt like like as we move through our own looking for language around experience, like there's a certain rediscovery at various stages. And it's like we tell the story differently at different moments, depending on what we retrieve or what we're able to retrieve, right? What we have access to. So let's look at a couple of these sources. Then I'm going to open it up pretty early, and I want to hear people's thoughts. I'm going to open up. I want to underscore her theme here. So the source number 3, just to again, the theme and the assertion here being that the wilderness experience is a looking for language, a search for what can be spoken. If you look at source number 3. In the book about Hosea, he says, assuredly, I will speak coaxingly to her and lead her through the wilderness and speak to her heart, right? Like the wilderness is a place where speech is possible, even as it's being lost. Like there's a notion for finding language, right? Look here at source in the Midbar experience itself. So starting at source, right, number 7. In the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, we have a story of the Asaf Suf, the riffraff, Asher B'kirbo, Hitavu ta'ava v'yashuvu v'yivku gam v'nesov v'yomru mi achilenu basar. Remember that story, right? They're sitting, gluttonous craving comes along and they start crying, say they've only had meat to eat, right? Well, not one of our best moments. And then they say, Zacharnu da daga in verse 5, we remember the fish that we ate in Mitzrayim, this completely, I mean, is it a real memory? They remember the fish that they ate for free, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks, the onions, the garlic. This is what they remember. It says all we're looking to is the man, right? They're completely, right? They're using speech here. And they're speaking about their experience, and they're looking for something, and it's clearly a rebellion. It's clearly it's a reconstruction of their past. But like, what are they even saying? Like, it's not even like And then look at source number 8. Like again, now speech is being used in a different way. It's being used, right, to speak about Aaron and about Moshe. And Aaron and Miriam. Are speaking about Moshe and about this Isha Akushit, this moment, and the word speaking is all about speaking. Vayomru in verse 2. Harak ach b'Moshe diber Adonai alo gam banu diber vayishma Adonai. It's like they're speaking like, didn't God speak to us? It's all about speech, like who's speaking to whom, and right. And in the first source, they're speaking about their experience in a way that is from a deep source of confusion, a deep source of longing, but they're not yet fully acknowledging that they're free people, right? Their speech act is a way of reconstructing slavery in a way that is completely distorted, right? And they're not speaking about truth, but they're completely bewildered. Like, well, how can anybody read that without thinking they are completely confused? Right now, they're complaining for meat. They're complaining for, they wish they were back in absolute, radical slavery. You can imagine how they're trying to metabolize the trauma and trying to say, oh, it was better for me when I was living in that relationship. It was better for me when I was back there, right? The incipient beginnings of freedom always want us to imagine that we can escape from freedom. We want to go back to where, we were safer, or we imagine we were. So their speech act here undermines their own redemption project, right? And then just one second, Nikki, and then source number 9. Then the whole community is now speaking up and crying. This is later in the book, right? They say, would that we had died in the land or even died here. Their speech act here is, their gestures are the frenetic and fanatic gestures of a client, or someone in therapy who's beginning to feel into the edges of freedom, and they come up against anxiety, and they don't know if it's okay to be alive, it's okay to be free, it's okay to be, that they're not going to be endangered anymore. Their speech act, again, is undermining their own freedom project, right? Source number 9. Would that we were their speech act, like they speak, their own suffering, they speak their own edge of anxiety. And then they say in verse 10, and more and now God's punishment comes as a result of their own speech. Again, the word dibur in source 10, in verse 28. This is around, right? This is God says to them, yeah, you want me, it'll happen as you have spoken. Again, underscoring, as Romemu would say, their speech act is being spoken back to them. What you are speaking is itself becoming the undermining of your redemption project. You're using speech now in a way that is invoking, suffering. You're continuing to perpetuate your own suffering and undermine your freedom project. If you look at, and we'll get to an alternate possibility in a second. Look at source 12. We know this source, right? Source 12 in the book of Numbers. And God spoke to Moshe saying, we know, take the staff, gather the people around Hakelet Eidah, you and Aaron, your brother. And then what word is being used? Vidibartem, like vidbar, right? Vidibartem, elasela, speak to the rock. Make sure that you use speech here. And using speech, you actually, it's a complete beautiful metaphor for their heart. Speak to the rock so that now it gives forth water. Use your speech now in order to do the impossible, right? The heart of stone that can't flow, the heart, right? The hearts of the people that are still using language to undermine their own freedom. Use speech, Moshe, but of course, right, Moshe doesn't use speech. Let's look at the last two sources here in the speech project that is, right, that is so much a part of the work of Bamidbar. In source 13, we're in the story of Balaam and Balak, right? Later on in the book of Numbers, there's a prophet who is hired by a king named Balak. And Balaam is the prophet who is supposed to use speech now to curse the Jewish people. And yet again, there's another conversation about how speech is being used to undermine the redemption project. Balaam says to Balak, he says, now that I've come to you, have I the power to speak freely? The word that will be placed in my mouth by Elohim, that is what I will speak. And the word dibur there is again vital. Like even Balaam is getting on with the project of speaking redemption instead of speaking slavery, instead of speaking right into the past, instead of speaking into the present and the future.
It's Dalet Bet Resh.
Dalet Bet Resh, dibur, yeah. And the last source is the source, of course, of Benot Tzlofchad, the incredibly beautiful story of the daughters of someone named Tzlofchad, who spoke. And God says, Kain Benot Tzlofchad Dovrot, right? Verse 7 says that the plea of Tzlofchad's daughters is just, meaning they have spoken well. That's literally the translation. As the daughters of Tzlofchad have spoken, that's how it should be. Right? They spoke well, and the underscoring here of the speech act of the daughters of Tzlofchad to change reality and to speak possibilities instead of speaking and limiting possibilities is really, I think, Zornberg's point, that they arrive in the desert, a place of radical, what she called immense emptiness that dwarfs the imagination, she writes, and into this desert, which is a speaking place. The Israelites use speech to undermine their own redemptive possibilities. They're using speech in a way that also she calls a cathartic working through, right? It's not necessarily, they're cast it so negatively. It's just as she called it, a therapeutic experience, like any one of us would continue to speak in ways that are disempowering. We have speech patterns that are habit patterns, right? We speak the world into being as God speaks the world into being. And the book of Numbers, which is really the book of the wilderness, bewilders, because of the very double meaning of that word. It's wilderness and it's a speaking place. And what's at stake is the world that we want to conjure, and how we get, we work through the wrong ways to speak about the human project, or the less effective and unskillful ways to speak about it. I'm just gonna show you one alternate way to speak about it, in a way, and in the imagined beauty of the Midbar being the place where the Torah is received. If you look in source 4, go back to source 4. You see here? Yeah. And Moshe led the flock to the farthest end of the Midbar, the farthest end of the wilderness. Yeah, are you there? Rabbi Yoshua said, Lama hayo rodef lamidbar? Said, why didn't Moshe run to the, or take the flock to the wilderness? Because Moshe saw Lefisha Ra'ash Israel nit'alu min hamidbar. He saw that the Israelites would be lifted up, would be elevated, right, in the wilderness, as it says in the Song of Songs, Mizot ha'olam min hamidbar. Mizot olam min hamidbar. Who is this that is rising up from the wilderness, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful Song of Songs, right? The lover says, who's this that has, Mizot olam min hamidbar. Who's the one who was Olah, that it lifted up in the Midbar? Shahayalahem Mina Midbar. Right? What did the Midbar give them? What did the desert give the Israelites? It gave them the man, it gave them the slav, which is the quail. It gave them the be'er, the well. It gave them the Mishkan, the tabernacle. It gave them the Shekhinah, the divine presence. It gave them the Kahuna, the priesthood. It gave them Malchut. It gave them sovereignty and kingship. And it also gave them ananei kavod, like this glorious clouds. All of these things were in the desert. Moshe saw that the desert was a place for them to receive gifts, right? It was a place to be elevated and refined. And then this last very remarkable phrase in the Midrash, the ein midbar ella dibur, and the midbar is none other than a place where speaking happens. Shne'emar right? Your lips are like a scarlet thread. Your mouth, is lovely. So the mouth here in the Song of Songs, the lover's mouth is described as a place of the speaking place, right? Which also sounds like the desert place, the wilderness place, the place where that which is, possibilities emerge, where language is found and discovered, right? So the Midrash frames the Midbar experience as a place where we are elevated and refined, where speech is discovered, but also a place where, as we saw, that's the counter narrative. It can also be the place, as we saw in the sources that we brought, where language is struggling to be accurate and to be refined and to be uplifting. This next piece, and then I'll open it up, I promise. Rabbi Berechia Amar. This is such a beautiful countertext or contra tension text with the Midbar as a bewildering place. It's also a place where beloved things happen. Rabbi Berechia Amar, Hapasuk hazeh Hamidbar Amaro. This verse, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys, was spoken by the wilderness. Now that phrase, just imagine that artistic phrase. He imagines the desert as the personified desert, speaking that the desert said, I am a rose of Sharon. Ani chavatzelet Sharon shoshanat amakim. It's a great phrase in Song of Songs. Ani chavatzelet Sharon. I am this rose of Sharon, which the rose is wrong. It's a chavatzelet. It's not a rose. It's like a unique plant that grows in the desert, right? It knows how to be in the place of barren possibilities, but also grows there. It's what was it? Chavatzelet.
It's
Hibiscus, hibiscus, yeah. So it's Ani Chavatzel Sharon. I am right, and so Rabbi Berechia said that was spoken by the desert, right? I am this. You think that I'm this barren wasteland, but I am this rose of Sharon. I am this hibiscus, right? What does that mean? Ani midbar, right? I am wilderness, v'chavivani, and I am beloved. Shekol tovot sheba'olam chavuyin bi. All of the good things in the world are hidden within me. As it says in Isaiah 41, Etein bamidbar erez shita. I am, he says that, I will plant cedars and acacias in the wilderness, said Isaiah, in God's name. Like those things are hidden within me. Nitanam li HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheyu shmurim bi. God put those things in me because I know how to protect them. I know how to guard them. I know how to be a container for them. And when God will request them for me, so when God gives them, when God requests those things from me, I will give them without any, right? I won't ask anything from God. Nothing will be lacking. God, I'll give back what God had put safely in me, had invested in me. I'll give it back without any, God's investment will be returned completely. And then then this line, the ani mativ ma'asim tovim, and I will have, I will be martivist, I'll be moist. I'll be moist, or I'll be, ratuv is to be wet. I'll be moist, with good deeds. And I will sing a song in front of God. Shenemar, Yisusum midbar v'tziyah. The wilderness and the parched land shall rejoice.
Wow.
So this is the tension of the midbar experience, of the finding language, and that the radical ambivalence and beauty of the desert. The desert is midbar, it speaks. It's the place where Torah is given, which is the most beautiful expression of speech. And yet it's a place where the Israelites are struggling to find their own voice and continue to speak of lack. Right? This midrash speaks of no lack. It'll be wet. It'll be right. The desert will be, it'll be a place where trees are growing, right? Right. It'll be a place where the very place where your catharsis was happening will be the place where your fecundity will be discovered. But it's not that simple because it'll take 40 years. And it'll be many, many almost circuitous repetitions. Like, why can't we just go directly to the promised land? No, because you're still working through your karmic inheritance. You're still, you think you're ready to go into the promised land, but you're speaking as if you're not ready. And I'm sure any therapist in the room can know what it's like when someone resists their own freedom. It's kind of a common experience, right? Where we set ourselves up against our own redemption. We long to hold on to our neuroses and our communal impediments because they have become so familiar, even as we also cry out for release from them. Imagine Moshe as the great therapist, like how hard it must have been. He takes the people to they're in the desert now. God is, crowds of glory, manna everywhere, and the people can't stop fantasizing about how good they had it back when they were in Egypt. It's like,
Garlic.
We had garlic. It's like, no, but now you're free. But what about the garlic? It's just, we could easily plug in so many things on a communal level, on a personal level, would that we were, make the Israelites great again, the mega project, let's go back there. That's when it was great. That's when, All right, so I'll stop there. I'm sure they're in the room and in the Zoom. And let's start in the room. And then we'll move to let's do Nikki and then Tony and then Paul. We'll do 4 and then we'll do 4 online. So then Eden, and then we'll move to Jay, Beth, Daniel, and Helio. I think those are the 4 online that those names I see. Yeah. So go ahead, Nikki.
No, thank you, Harry. It's great reading. 2 comments. There's of course the saying the devil is better than the devil who don't, and that I think informs the Israelites and easiness. I'm writing a poem called "In the Desert," which I may change now to something about Bar, but we'll see. I think this will inform the poem. But there in that poem, the speaker has brought her Egypt with her into the desert. You know, she didn't leave it behind, and she is longing for, instead of the quail and this and, I mean, the fish and the meat, she's longing for the praises and the acknowledgements and the prizes it was awarded in a world that was based on that kind of achievement. So, and this is a new world, is God's world, and those prizes and awards and achievements are not, they're not besides the point. I'm very grateful. I hope this will inform my poem.
Well, you informed my poem, because I'm thinking, as you spoke, that it's such a powerful thing that they brought their Egypt with them. That phrase, don't bring your Egypt with you. And it's very hard not to. And in fact, maybe Aviva Zornberg is saying, maybe we're saying, like, to what extent is that inevitable? And that's, the cathartic therapeutic experience. We bring our traumas with them, and saying that we shouldn't is also like, how does that work exactly? Thank you for saying that. Like I went back to Great Neck this week, and as I spoke about last night, and I spoke about it very positively last night. But I remember it's also like the danger of like the healthy therapeutic glance in the rearview mirror is able to hold both the things that we narrowly remember and expanding now to see things that we might not have remembered in our telling of the story, but also telling the story also without making it covering over and romanticizing, right? That's the Israelites here are clearly romanticizing what must have been, I think. I mean, again, someone might come and say, well, you don't know, maybe they loved their garlic, or maybe it really was great. Like, I don't think that was the Torah's point, but knowing what to leave behind and what to remember is really and how to remember it. That's really what's, I think, at play here. And that's very beautiful to take your Egypt with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nikki. Tony.
So one of the take homes here, I think, is that manna and the desert that one receives it in is, to say the least, an acquired taste.
Yeah,
That we know.
Babylon, the speakers.
The unknown is an acquired taste, where we know what we know and enjoy, and to really embark on and continue in the spiritual journey where the unknown meets us every day. Even if we're not on the spiritual journey, the unknown meets us every day. So that's a big acquired taste. That's one thing. Second thing is what prevents that, and this craving, the second noble truth, that suffering is caused by our over craving for the known or the past or what we've gotten attached to. And my friend Bruce Rubin, who wrote the script for Ghost and Jacob's Ladder and a bunch of other things, beautifully embodies it with the subway ghosts, where the subway ghost breaks the cigarette case and says, just what I'd give for just one more drag. And that's what these people are saying. On the flip side of that,
It's so fun that you say that, because I was so sympathetic to that character.
Yeah.
Like, I was so sympathetic to that
Yeah.
longing, even for drag, like anything for embodied life, the things that we take for granted. And
Yeah.
that
Do you know the famous encounter between Odysseus and Aeneas in the Odyssey?
talk to us.
Where Odysseus goes down Catabasis to the underworld,
Mm.
and you probably know the story, it's one of the best, and he's so excited to meet all the heroes and all the great dead, and he's like, oh wow, this is the best place, everyone's here, it's Valhalla. And he talks to Aeneas and says, you're the greatest of the heroes, you are like, Hercules, and you're all these figures in one, and I'm so honored to meet you, and you must be so happy knowing that your name is going to live forever, and you're so honored, and you're glorious, and clouds of glory. And I'm somehow I actually imagine Aeneas just with a cigarette, like listening to this out of place person, this living person in the underworld, and in the text in the Odyssey, Aeneas says, I would give it all up for one day upstairs.
Wow.
One day in the sunshine.
One day what?
One day of embodied presence on the earth.
Wow.
You see,
Interesting.
heroism is the highest value, right? Greco-Roman culture,
Right.
it's like glory, fame.
Wow.
And it's this amazingly transgressive thing where Aeneas, the greatest hero of all, is like, what betcha, I would have one day under the sun.
Right.
And-
Well, by the way-
and, you know, so
And-
those
So
two points.
yeah, go back to.
And so on the positive side of this craving, which is the essence of samsara in a way, but on the positive side, you have Oliver in the musical by the same name going,
Yeah.
food, glorious food, hot
Right.
peppers and mustard.
Right. Right.
And just to wind up,
To be hungry, yeah. In conclusion,
in
in
conclusion,
summation,
we are light years away from finding our voice in the desert, and we just need to listen well to the moist voice of the desert
yeah,
for a long time. And when we finally find our voice, Buber later in his life said, I only write what I'm commanded to write, which is a pretty amazing statement in a way. And that's somebody who has found.
yeah, I think this is Tony, everybody's, there's a phrase in rabbinic literature, it says, Lefi, Leshitato means according to their philosophy, like they'll say, oh, this person is Lefi Shitato, like this is consistent with their, so it's like Tony Leshitato is the non-dualist, formless person in our midst, who also has a bit suspicion of form, right, a little bit. It's like, form, don't be attached to form, so like you're in some way, you're riding the formless, your love of
Wind horse.
yeah, you're in the
Wind horse.
formless, in the backdraft of formlessness. You're like, it's like, this is the people, they're attached to form and they want to drag and like, and all of us are like that to some degree. And the Buber is like that, the height of, I only write what's commanded of me. And I think that I'm slightly, I just want to say, to my Shita, David Leshitato, I'm a little bit suspicious of too much identification with either one, form and formless, and I try my best to
The
do
Heart
it.
Sutra.
Like exactly, I'm a bit like in love with people who are in love with form, meaning like the value of it. I spent so many years poo-pooing it and then noticing how arrogant it was, because I would always look at like, oh, look at them so stuck in their, their love of Jewish form. I'm like, seeing through it, and I'm back in the simple, it's mountains and it's rivers, and it's like, I love the simplicity of certain forms. I know their danger too, like, you can get caught in idolatrous.
Nicely put, Rabbi.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit like, anyway, so I love you, and that was great also. So I don't remember who was the third person was Paul, and then Eden, and then we didn't forget about you guys. We know, it's frustrating, but go Paul, go ahead.
So the midbar and numbers, two different things. One's a play, one's an act.
Mhm.
They're not really two different things. They're two sides of the same coin.
Mhm.
Both are necessary. Necessary to what? What's the project?
Mhm.
And the project seems to me, over the course of the book, is God has decided, and Moses is executing on God's decision to push the Israelites away. They must disappear in order to birth a new nation. And the
Amen.
wilderness is difficult to find the boundary. And that sort of place is what's required in order to completely extinguish the slave mentality, what the Jews were, in order for it to become something else. And that's what the book is about, is Moses not touching, not caressing, but very firmly and decisively pushing them away.
Mm.
And then over the course, obviously, God decides that Moses must be pushed away as well.
Mm.
And Deuteronomy then is his valedictory, but the decision is made in the wilderness. And so Moses perhaps understands that as pushing himself away at the same time as pushing the rest of the Israelite nation.
So I want to explore that. So for a second, is that okay? So in your rendering of this, it's essentially that the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, if it's okay, can I also like stretch it into what we were just saying? Is that okay with you?
Yes.
So if this is a therapeutic journey, as Wiesenberg imagines, and it's a place where the wilderness bewilders, And it threatens to engulf the capacity to speak about one's own experience. It also is a place where the Israelites are being tested to see if they can become the kind of people that for whom freedom's promise is given. And it's done by pushing them away in the way that a therapist would make a strong enough boundary for the self to grow and resist. And in its resistance also come to know itself, know oneself. Like in some way you can imagine the Israelites now being given a chance to speak their experience for 400 years, where they couldn't scream and rebel against Pharaoh, and they couldn't rebel against their taskmasters. They couldn't voice their anger and their rage and their disillusionment and their fear and their cravings. And in that way, being pushed away, they come to see that even though the project will be abandoned in that particular generation, the next generation, born from those therapeutic interventions and those therapeutic skills, like those moments, will birth a free people who will be able to inherit the land in a way that their ancestors couldn't. And in that pushing away process, there's a healthy, necessary refinement. It's a gift given to them in a way by it triggers transference, it triggers projection, it triggers all of the things that were latent in that group that would not otherwise have come forth had it not been that way, including Moshe, who was also born a slave, even though he was born a free person, but he was pulled from the waters of death. And so is that, can I extend that in that way, or was that?
Well, I mean, that's a very nicely poetic way of putting it. I honestly, in my mind, it's something far harsher.
Much harsher.
Much harsher, yes. That the divine understood at Sinai with the golden calf, that this generation was unredeemable. And and all of these stories that we read about in Numbers are way stations in the struggle to excise that mentality, and it's unredeemable. It's only to the next generation. The next generation learns from that struggle, or that is the hope.
It's amazing to think. I'm going to move into Eden and to everyone online, but I just want to underscore. I think that in a way, what you're saying is really, like, the book of Numbers is basically only 2 years in the life of that 40-year journey, right? There's only the first year and then the 40th year, and the intermediate 38 years we don't know anything about. Nothing. Nothing. The story is just like the first year and all things that are happening, and then all of a sudden we're in the 40th year and we don't know what happened during those 38 years that preceded. So most people don't know that. Like, think like it has like a very, but it's not that way.
Right.
And so maybe the decision was already made early in the first year after seeing all the things that happened, that this wasn't going to work, right? And by the 40th year, it was already clear that, anyway, thank you, Paul. We're going to hold that. Eden, and then we'll go online. Yeah. Oh my God, it's late. Okay, sorry.
Just quickly, I want to say, I felt this before, but felt it really strongly today, how much the experience in the desert feels like an experience of traumatized children, and the way that trauma freezes you in time. And these response, especially the food response today, it's like, well, it's kids. Of course you remember what you ate. Like, of course you remember the especially in an abusive home, we can just make it a home. When you are fed, you remember what you're fed. It's food that you love. Like, so that I just felt that so strongly today, and that if it is a therapeutic experience, then an experience of growth, of knowing yourself, of the wilderness becoming known. There's a lot, and like maybe Moshe was a great therapist, and also maybe he was not a trauma-informed child therapist, right? Like maybe didn't have those skills, and therefore maybe that first generation is irredeemable, but I'm diving for that there are tools that exist that came into being that Moshe didn't have, right? So it's not irredeemable forever. Hopefully.
And they did receive Torah. Let's not forget that. They might not have made it into the promised land, but they received
Well, that
Torah.
was the thing I want to say about this, the idea of their vociferous lack of faith. Like, they didn't leave,
Right,
like they made it 38 years.
Yeah.
However,
And-
I stayed.
Exactly, and it feels like that was the other thing that really felt like childhood to me, because whether or not I wanted to have faith in my parents, I had to have faith in my parents.
Yeah.
You can't, it's impossible not to have faith in your parents.
yeah,
And faith that you can't control is a very complicated experience, right?
totally.
And so, yeah, I think, and I think that line too about making every midbar Sinai, it feels like Genesis 2, it feels like
Yes.
you make the stranger known. And in the wilderness, that's you, right? That you are hopefully
Become known to
become
yourself.
known to yourself. With the right, and without the right parenting, it's, I don't know, with any parenting. it's
Yeah,
an easy
we should
process.
do we should do a whole series on the
Yeah.
parenting strategies of God and Moses.
He's certainly scolding them.
yeah, they
here.
get scolded frequently and
Yeah,
not exactly something out of what we would call an enlightened parenting model, but at the same time, there might be, the pendulum might have swung in the other direction where there are, some certain. It's not abusive to hold your children or to hold people to a certain standard and to expect something, like there's a way that expecting something also is a beautiful, like in some of the
No
Zen
boundaries.
schools where you're just kind of like, it's not always gonna, sometimes
doesn't work.
delusion can't be dispelled with love. It has to be dispelled with gevura.
Mm.
So there's a lot here. Anyway, so we're gonna move into the Zumagog and get Jay, Beth, Daniel, and Helio. Go ahead, guys. Thank you for waiting.
Shabbat shalom. You're welcome. When I led Torah study in my local synagogue, we rarely got past the first phrase, the first verse. And what a first verse we have here in the first verse of a book. It seems very prosaic, but I think it's very profound. There's two different things happening here, one with space and one with time. There's in space, there is a move to some specificity, right? The wilderness of Sinai. Well, yes, your colleague was right. That is, but we don't even know where Har Sinai is justifiably. It's still quite open. The space that is specific is the tent of meeting, which is portable. But look what happens with time. With time, it's the first day of the second month of the second year. I mean, there's no doubt about time. It is incredibly specific. I think this is kind of Heschelian. I mean, we're a religion of time, not of space. It's saying, in essence, space is much less important than time. You have to choose the moment. You have to make the time. As someone who spends most of his time with words, and to your speech thing, the desert is open to everything. The desert essentially is nothing but horizon. And to make and choose words, you have to make time. And I think, and even the Buber quote, when is that key word in that phrase. So I think that's the lesson of that very amazing first verse, that you've got to have a place, but it's portable. Time is the one thing where you have to choose and make specific.
So thank you, Jay. I'm not a big fan of that Heschel quote, frankly, but I love that you brought it. I think that there's a tension between the biblical understanding of what is holy and sacred and Heschel's rabbinic emphasis. I think it's true for the rabbis that time is superior to space because the rabbis lived at a time where space was not available, and their brilliance was in inflecting on time. But I think that for Jews, justifiably and rightfully so, in my opinion, there has always been a beautiful attempt to balance the portable and the movable space with time as well. And so especially, I'm a big fan of form, and I think space is a very important part of form and time. But I agree with you. I think it's beautiful to imagine Torah as portable. And that's the great lesson of the exile for us, which was that Torah was portable. And that Torah was, and like our values could go with us wherever we went, and we had to. But there's also something profoundly important, I think, about space as well. So I just, my prerogative in Romemu to place an emphasis on certain things. And I think that in many ways, the rabbinic project, especially in the neo-Hasidic and Hasidic world, both space and time became completely relativized to the inner place, which is, when and where became the self, and when you're ready, and when time is ready, and space is ready. So I think there's some integration of all these pieces that I think is vital, but I cannot thank you more for pointing out the specificity of that verse, which could take us all morning. It's true. Beth, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
I have a couple things I wanted to say. Early on, it was said that we received Torah in the Midbar of all places. I think Midbar is the perfect place for us to receive Torah. It's this in-between space, and fully come out of that in-between space throughout our lives. It's a transitional space. And we're constantly in transit in some way or other, whether literally or metaphorically. And one of the things that I think about the 40 years in Midbar Sinai is that in some places, like Sefer Yirmiyahu, it's referenced in a very short pasuk that this was some sort of honeymoon period between us and God. And those of us who have been married and who've been wildly in love with our spouse, we know that this honeymoon period is really intense. And yet at some point, you really have to differentiate from your spouse. You can't just be locked together every minute, and physically, emotionally, mentally, at some point you must separate from each other. And I think the 40-year period shows that we needed time. We needed a lifetime to do that. And I think that is seen in contemporary relationships. At least what I experienced in mine was that you need time to yourself. And the final point I wanted to make, with all due respect to my friend Tony, I think the search for the unknown is not an acquired taste. I think it's innate. And I think conversely, it's taken away from us. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't stick your nose in where it doesn't belong. If you look at any toddler, what are they doing? They're into everything. They're looking here, they're looking there, they're picking things up, they're shoving things in their mouth. They're in a constant state of exploration. And I think that is our natural state.
Yes.
And as we are socialized, we are brought out of that. Debarti.
Yeah, Dibart, and perfectly Dibart, and beautifully said, and a lot of pieces there, but we're running out of time, so I want to go to Daniel and then Helio. Thank you, Beth.
Shabbat Shalom. When you spoke about the discourse in the desert, that people spoke and complained and couldn't understand each other, I could not avoid remembering the Tower of Babel, right? What happened there. And to me, the realization that in some sense, we are reliving that today with the problems that we have in communicating all of this huge wave of myths and disinformation, polarization, and so on, which makes me think perhaps that we are living in the midbar now.
Yeah.
And maybe, we should, I hope we don't go through the same process of the whole generation dying, that hopefully the next generation can move forward and get away from that pattern. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to close with that, Daniel, in a minute. Okay, so I just want to go to Helio, and then we're going to look at one last text, and then we're going to close. I'm sorry to Gloria. I'm sorry, we got to move. So Helio, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
The phrase "the wilderness speaks" remember me a very famous phrase from Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst. The phrase speaks, the truth speaks. It's a complicated phrase, but it's like the wilderness speak the truth, or maybe the wilderness speak the I. So it's important who speaks, who listen, and who speaks the truth. Maybe the wilderness speaks the truth. It's complicated.
Yes, so let me go from you into something that some of you might be familiar with, and I don't know why this is here now. Yeah, there's my stalker with an alias. Great. Oh boy. Okay. The source. Where is it? It's from the Svas Emes. Source number 18. The Midrash likens Torah to a wilderness. It has to be as ownerless as a wilderness. Scripture says, from the wilderness to Matana, which can be read as from wilderness there was a gift. The Midrash tells us of a prince who entered one city after another, only to see the people, the populace, flee from him until he came to a ruined city, where he was greeted with praise. And said the prince, "This is the best of all the cities. Here is where I will set my throne." The word midbar comes from a root meaning, which is to lead or to rule. It's another meaning of the word midbar. The midbar is one who submits to that rule, the person who negates their own self, realizing that there is no power, they have no power to act without the life flow of God. And that is the difference between the populace of the various cities. Those who fled also feared the prince, but they retained power to act on their own, right? Then he goes into the nations of the world, revere God, but they call God God of gods. But Israel are like a midbar. They have no power or leadership at all on their own, which is another way of saying, again, we're kind of slightly extracted from the language, and it's essentially what we were talking about, what Beth was just saying about the wilderness being a certain innate, there's a certain innate yearning for wilderness that we have as children, and with our innate curiosity, a capacity to be in the unknown, which actually, instead of eliciting fear from us, elicits curiosity or a certain openness to it, new experience. And that is kind of the healthy mind of it's the promise of the healthier mind, which can see a new experience as not something that will be fit into a category that's come before, but potentially be something radically new. And in that way, Torah, it's a profoundly important thing that Beth said, I think, and about the place where, it's Davka, the place matters here, just to speak to Jay's point. Like Mount Sinai can be seen as a mezuzah between Egypt and the Promised Land. Like, if you think about the mezuzah and its placement on the doorpost as being a phenomenon, like a miniature Sinai, then it's not natural to think that Torah would have been given in Sinai, frankly. Torah should have been given in the land of Israel. The Midrash points this out. Why wasn't the Torah given in Israel? It's a uniquely Jewish document, isn't it? Why should it be? It doesn't speak to the nations of the world. It doesn't say that it's for the Jews. Why is it it should have been given in the land of Israel? It's like you don't get it in the middle of the deserts. And why would you give it to the people who weren't going to make it into the deserts? Like where were they supposed to leave it? Like give it to the people who make it to the desert. Let the Torah be the end goal. Like get out of Egypt, safely pass through the wilderness and show that you can handle it. And then you get to the land and then you get Torah.
It's a tidier story.
It's a much tidier, Occam's razor would demand that would be the most elegant, imaginable course of action. And the rabbis are bothered by that. They say, because if we had been given the Torah of the land, then when we left the land, we would have thought the Torah only belongs in the land. But we're given the Torah outside of the land to tell us that wherever we go, the Torah goes with us. It's not a feature of the land, but a feature of the people who live in the land. And we would say, in different language, we'd say, like what Beth, I think, was saying, and Jay and others, which is the portability of the Torah is also its deeply human structure. The Torah was given at Sinai. This is a fractal of life, because life will give us moments in each and every epoch and every decade and every generation of being in between. And with the Torah of in between is the Torah of wilderness, of what my friend said, finding the Sinai in the Midbar. Making Midbar, wilderness, into Sinai, a place of revelation. I don't think, Daniel, that it's not a question whether or not we're in the Midbar. It's, of course, we're in the Midbar. Every generation is in the Midbar. When new technology is introduced, we're in the Midbar. We have no idea. The problem is that there was no Torah in the, being given right before technology was introduced. And so we don't know how to use it properly. like, oh, the technology was going to be the panacea, really? The internet was going to be a global enlightenment, really? It just would mean that various actors, depending on their developmental stage, would use that tool in a way that their developmental stage makes available to them. If you're a racist, you'll use the internet for racism. If you're a fascist, you'll use it for fascism. If you're an enlightened being, you'll use it for enlightenment. It's like technology is not the answer. It's just another tool. And so is the land of Israel. And that's why the Torah was given before we entered there, so that when we entered there, we would know how to use it. Right? And that's the question for us at any given moment is, what's the Torah of this midbar that we're in? And how do we open to it? And how do we speak into it words and language and frames that might make from that desert a chavatzelet, a sharon, a flowing sap-like song of beauty. This is the final text, and then I'll leave you guys. We'll all go. T.S. Eliot wrote, "In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing that you know." So this is, leave it to T.S. Eliot to take us, and talk about an anti-Semite. We started this morning, Nikki, with telling me an anti-Semite, T.S. Eliot, with all of the beauty of his own poetry, was in a desert of ignorance around Jews, right? And a desert of ignorance around a lot of things.
Until the end, when he had a correspondence with Groucho Marx.
And so
And he met with Buber for a day and thought he was one of the great men he had ever met in
great.
his life.
So anyway, so T.S. Eliot,
Yeah.
he himself had to go by the way of not knowing who the Jew was, so that he could come to the place where he did know. And he liked a few of us, thankfully. But it's even someone like that can say something very truthful. And even in a desert, in a wilderness, you can find language that will support the path. And so I guess the blessing this morning is back to what Jay said and what was said here in the room, that may God give us the strength to, in the wilderness, which bewilders, to find language and wisdom that might make that cathartic and therapeutic journey that all of us are on from the moment we're born until the moment we pass, to live informed by form and in language and in structures that deepen our experience of compassion and wisdom, and Torah for all the in-betweens that we will inevitably come across. Amen.
Amen.
Yeshua.
And also
Yeshua.
dedicating this morning's learning to the four remarkable people who will be standing at Sinai this morning, to Jessica and to Kevin and to Rachel and
Laura.
and of course to our beloved Devorah, to Wishkin. We're on our way to support them. Shabbos, everybody. Yeshua. Yeah, Shabbos. Unbelievable.
Okay, hi everybody. I think you're able to unmute, you're able to chat with each other. Wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Gil.